Alright, here's some extra study videos for the test, for things that maybe aren't, exactly like they're on your review, that I thought might be problematic. So, you're trying to find this k in this equation here, so that negative 3, 6 is the solution. Well, what does it mean for negative 3, 6 to be solution? It means if I plug it in, the two sides are equal. That's one way we could look at it, okay? So now this is an x value here, and this is a y value here. So if you look at what's going on, what I could do is plug those in here and here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to need to find k. That's what we're after. But x is negative 3, and y is 6, okay? So we get negative, and it's supposed to equal 9 is what it's supposed to equal. Let's see, this was the subtraction sign here. Alright, so negative 3k, okay, negative 2 times 6 is negative 12 is equal to 9. So if you just plug, you take the equation and you plug in the information they give you, if you're just doing what you can do, you're going to get the solution here. So if I want to solve for k now, all I've got to do is add 12 to both sides. We get negative 3k is equal to 21. And then if I divide both sides by negative 3 to solve for k, to get it by itself, I'm going to get k is equal to negative 7. And so that's all I have to do is take this, plug this into it, and that's what you should do if you get stuck on a problem, don't know what to do. Take the information they gave you, try to put it together in a way like this. Maybe just try plugging in numbers to an equation. Okay, here's another one that it would be good to study for the test, because there's one like it. Determine k. Well, if you look at k, it's right here. Just write this. That's what that is a k if you can't read it. Now, it says so that the equation kx plus 8y equals 7 will have this slope. Well, now, there's nothing to plug in here, but you know what? I do know that if I get an equation like this, one thing I can do to find the slope would be to solve it for y. Because if we solve for y, that's going to put it in y equal mx plus b form. And the thing that I know about that is if I can put it in that form, I can tell what the slope is by looking in front of the x. Now, the slope is supposed to be this negative 2/3, and we don't know what's going to happen here, but we do what we can. And that's the thing, is you kind of got to think, well, what can I do here? Well, if I can put it in a different form, maybe that will be helpful. So we're going to solve for y. In order to solve for y, we'll subtract kx from each side, just moving it to the other side. K just stands for some number. We just don't know what it is. So we got we got 8y is equal to, I'm going to put that x term first, negative kx plus 7. Well, I still don't have y by itself, so let's solve for y. Keep going. We're going to divide everything by 8. So I get y equal, now I'm going to write this a certain way. I'm going to write it as negative k over 8 x plus 7/8. Now, when I look at this number in front of here, I want it to be equal to negative 2/3 up here. I want these two things to be equal, and we look at it and we think, well, that looks kind of weird. Well, here's what I can do. I could say, well, that's the slope, and this is what the slope is supposed to be up here. So why don't I set them equal to each other? And that way I can solve for k. I can figure out what the k should be. Because negative k over 8, they want it to be equal to negative 2/3. Now, if you look what I got going on here, I've got a proportion. I could cross multiply and solve this really easily. Negative k times 3 would be negative 3k. And then 8 times negative 2 would be negative 16. So if I want to figure out what k is, all I got to do now is divide both sides by negative 3. And those would cancel out, and I'd get k equal, well, a negative over a negative is a positive 16/3. These are the kind of things that you see on the SAT test on problems they think would be kind of a harder difficulty level. But definitely, if you understand that y equals mx plus b has the slope in front of it, just put it in that form, and you go, well, that's supposed to be negative 2/3. Oh, I could set them equal to each other, and then I could figure out what k would be to make that happen. Okay, so we're going to grab, here's another test type problem, okay. So you're supposed to solve this inequality. You're supposed to graph it, and I'll just have to draw a graph because there's not a great way for me to have room to work and pull one up also on this app. Okay, so I got something to work with here. Now, if I'm going to graph this, Easy graphing form would be to put it in this form y equal mx plus b. Okay, so let me do that. How do I put something in that form? I solve for y. So let's solve for y. And then we can graph it a little easier. Okay, and remember on your test, these things are going to be multiple choice, so you're going to be just picking the correct graph. If I want to solve for y, I could subtract, I could move the 2x to the other side by subtracting it from both sides. I can always move things by adding or subtracting. I just can't split them apart by adding or subtracting. So it becomes 0 minus 3y is negative 3y is less than or equal to, and again, when I write these, I'm going to always put the x term first so that it looks like, this is an equal sign here, negative 2x plus 3. Well, y is not by itself, and what do I have to do to get y by itself? I need to divide everybody by negative 3. Okay, so these cancel out, and I end up with y. Ooh, this was an inequality sign, wasn't it? Let me write that in there. This was an inequality sign, less than or equal to was here. But the minute I divided by that negative 3, I need to switch the direction of the inequality sign. It now needs to point that way with the line under it. Because when you divide by a negative, you have to switch the direction of the inequality sign. So I'm going to have y. Now instead of less than or equal to, it's going to be greater than or equal to. Now on the slope, the number in front of the x, a negative over a negative is a positive 2/3. And I could write it as 2/3 x like that. And then plus 3 divided by negative 3 is a negative 1. So I could put plus negative 1, or I could just put 2/3 x minus 1. So now if I'm going to graph it, I say, okay, remember when I graph these things, I start with a y-intercept, it's negative 1. And put it there. Now, my slope is 2/3, so that means that's the rise over the run. So if it's 2/3, that means go up 2 and to the right 3 to get to your next point. So up 2 to the right 1, 2, 3. That would put it right here, okay? So now I'm going to draw the line, and I'm going to make it a solid line, and I'm going to use some yellow here to highlight because of this equal sign right here, okay? So I'm going to make it a solid line. If I had not had the equal sign, it would have been dotted. So here's the line. Didn't hit it very well. It's kind of hard to on the iPad. Okay, and now I got to do the shading. So let's look again. I'll use some purple here. Right here, the greater than symbol tells me I'm supposed to shade above the line. So my shading for this is right here. And on the test, you have to pick the correct graph out. And they could do things like make the line dotted instead of solid to mess it up. Or they could have shaded below instead of shading above to try to trick you. So just know that multiple choice things are checking for fine little differences. So just be careful. You know, another thing, when you're doing these things, make sure you're really carefully checking the y-intercept that's in the right spot, and just little things like that, okay? So the shading, the line, is the line graphed properly? Okay, another one that, I thought you might have a little bit of trouble with is to find the equation in standard form of a line, and they're going to give you the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Okay, now there's a couple of ways I could do this. First of all, if you look at this y-intercept of negative 3, if I use the equation y equal mx plus b, that's my b, okay? So what I could do is say, oh, I know what the b is. I'll write it in black. It's in minus 3. So now I have y equal mx minus 3. Now the quickest way to do this is to think this way. I could use the point slope formula, but this is going to be pretty fast. Now how am I going to find the slope? Well, look at the information given. Isn't that really 2 points? For instance, the x-intercept of 3, that's x is 3, and on an intercept, the opposite variable is equal to 0. So that's the point 3, 0. If the y-intercept is negative 3, that means x is going to be 0 and y is going to be negative 3. Yes, this was our y-intercept, and I've already plugged it in over here, but couldn't I use that to get the slope? Now, if you want to do the slope with a table, remember that's also a fast way to do it. So I'm going to put these in a table, just because we've done a lot of this in this chapter. And if you remember, the slope is the change in y, or subtract the y's on top of a fraction, over the change of x in the denominator. We're subtracting the x's. Well, I can do this with the slope formula, or I could do this. I could say, okay, the y's are over here. That's going to be the top of my fraction over here. How do I get from 0 to negative 3? Don't I subtract 3? Well, that's how much the y's changed. They went down 3. So now let's go do the x's. I'll use a different color just so we can really focus in. So if I look at the x's, if I go from 3 to 0, what did I do? Well, didn't I subtract 3? So on the bottom, how much did the x's change? They changed down 3 also. Well, if you look at this, this is just negative 3 divided by negative 3 is just a 1. So my slope is equal to 1 here. Now, I'm almost done with this because I just need to put the 1x minus 3. And again, lazy math guy writes it x minus 3. Now, I'm going to go to a different slide because this is not in standard form. And notice they want it in standard form. This is the equation, but how do I get it in standard form? So I have y equal x minus 3. And in standard form, the x and the y have to be on the same side and the numbers on the side by itself. Now, there's a couple of ways you could do this. Let me do what I think most of you would think to do. You'd probably go, let me move the x over there with that y and subtract x. I wouldn't have done that. I would have moved the y over because my x was already positive. But anyway, this would be negative 3 over here, and I would have negative x plus y is negative 3. There are always 4 or 5 and sometimes way more, paths you could take to get into the answer. I'm just going to show you one here. Now, the problem with this, it's almost right. It's almost in standard form. I've got all whole numbers in here, but the problem is in front of my x term, it's a negative, and that's a big no-no. We broke the math etiquette laws if we leave that negative there. So how could I get rid of it? Well, if I multiplied every number by negative 1, or I divided every number by negative 1, because if you think about it, there is an invisible 1 here, so technically I could divide everything by negative 1, because in front of that x, negative 1 over negative 1 is now a positive x. So I could do that. I could multiply by negative 1, I could divide by negative 1, or I could simply switch all the signs. If I follow out with the division I did, a positive divided by a negative is a negative y. And on the right-hand side, a negative divided by negative is a positive 3. So I would get that. If I had thought just switch the signs, I just want to show you that it does work. Okay, this is a negative, make it a positive, since that's what we need. This is a positive, so we're going to switch it to the opposite thing. This is a negative, let's make it a positive. Then I get the same result as if I did the actual division. So this is faster, that's why we like to do it.